One of the biggest differences between a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! And other card games is the extra deck. Having a toolbox readily available to you at all times is one of the differentiating factors that separates this game from any of the other ones out there. It adds a lot to the game because you not only have to be wary of what cards your opponent might have in their hand, but also what potential cards they could have in the extra deck too that could cause you trouble. It adds a huge amount of skill expression to the game since knowing how to utilize your extra deck to its fullest potential can be very difficult, but also very rewarding. And one of the biggest skills to have when it comes to the extra deck starts even before you play the game in deck building, where you need to figure out which cards you want to play to begin with. That leads me to today's topic: is the extra deck too small? With the growing complexity of the game, there have been more and more decks that have extremely tight extra decks with little to no wiggle room. A lot of people argue that this is a good thing because it means that you as a player have to make concessions when deck building, which just adds to the skill of the game. Maybe you want to play a Dark Charmer in your Teal'c deck, but that would mean sacrificing another valuable slot like Little Knight, one of the fusions, or maybe a rank 4. Others argue that this limits deck building because if there are 15 obvious choices that you need to play, then everyone would just play the 15 most optimal cards and call it a day. No need to be creative. I have my own opinions on this topic and I'm going to share them today in this video. First of all, do I think the extra deck is too small? Yes, I do. But do I necessarily think that's a bad thing? No, not really. I think having this limit on the extra deck really does force players to streamline their strategy based on which cards they enjoy playing. In Rescue Ace, for example, there are so many options for the extra deck, and although the deck doesn't need its extra for any of its plays, it can still feel very tight at times with how many options there are for the deck, and each one comes with their own set of advantages and disadvantages. The Firewall line is great because it can set up a spell and trap negate, but requires a huge investment from your extra deck, meaning you'll be sacrificing many great generic options. You could play the Synchro package with Jet Synchron, which gives you access to Barone and Savage, but leaves you more susceptible to interruptions and forces you to play a brick. You could play Mud Dragon and Dweller, which plays no bricks, but is also more situational. You could also just go for a more basic setup of IP into Little Knight, which isn't as flashy, but can be very effective. Regardless, each of these options have their own trade-offs and require you to think critically about the meta you're playing in and make tough decisions about what you want your end board to look like. There's also the argument that increasing the extra deck size will mess with the balance of specific cards like Pot of Prosperity and Pot of Extravagance, and that's definitely true. Being able to activate a third pot to draw 6 cards in total over the course of a game is very powerful, but I don't think this is as big of a deal as people think. Most of the time, if someone's resolving the second extra to draw 2, they're probably already winning that game, and getting to have a few cards left over in your extra deck doesn't really matter, since the decks that'll run that card usually don't use their extra deck very much to begin with. Prosperity is a different example altogether, and I can see this being a bit more of a problem. There's already barely a cost for digging 6 cards deep into most decks, and increasing the extra deck limit is going to make Prosp feel even more free, and will also make it usable in more decks since there are decks right now that can't afford to banish a third of their extra deck. With 5 more cards in the extra, that won't be as much of a problem. So this is just another solid argument for why the extra deck limit should stay how it is. However, I can understand the other side of the argument. There are some decks out there that feel like they lose a lot of potential thanks to the extra deck limit, and not having that limit would mean that players could now focus more on the technical play instead of the deck building aspect. I've already mentioned a deck like Tyr, for example, that would really enjoy being able to play like 18 to 20 cards in their extra deck. There are so many powerful options that you don't get to see because of the 15 card limit. But again, I don't really know if I want to live in a world where a deck like Tyr has the answer to any given situation in their extra because there's no real limit on it. So on one hand, it could be argued that the extra deck limit in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is becoming way too small thanks to how the game has evolved, but increasing that limit might disrupt the balance of the game. So what's the solution to this? Well, there's this growing trend I've been seeing more recently, shout out to Triff, that was the main reason I decided to make this video now. And that's the idea of siding extra deck monsters. In theory, it makes a lot of sense. Why play 3 of a Floodgate or an out to a specific board if you can just side a single extra deck monster that's accessible at all times that does the job for you? If the extra deck was bigger, you could just have these more situational cards in your extra deck with no downside. But seeing people side cards like Underworld Goddess for Pearly or Dweller for when they play against Tyr or Unchained is very interesting and in my opinion is the next logical progression. If the extra deck is so valuable, then why not dedicate a few side deck slots for those specific matchups? In my opinion, this adds another layer to the deck building process that really does force you to think ahead about how common a specific matchup is and whether or not you need to have certain cards mained in your extra deck or if they're situational enough to just side. This is also a way to solve the first problem of wanting more options in the extra deck without messing up the balance of the pot cards I mentioned. I can definitely see us moving towards a world where people start siding a couple of very targeted extra deck monsters in the future. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing remains to be seen, but for now it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And that's all for this video, guys. Let me know what you guys think about the current extra deck limit. Would you like to see it increased, or do you think it's fine how it is? If you enjoyed watching, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.